Thank you very much for organising this and giving us the opportunity to put our case forward. So I'm Rachel, I'm a mum of two. I have a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old now. And basically I hope that within this short presentation I can demonstrate why it is vital to involve preschool and primary age children in any plans or actions to restore nature. I'm going to explore the many barriers that prevent young families from developing a close relationship with nature, and finally provide an argument to show that if these barriers are not addressed, then the restoration of nature could prove futile. So first, a little bit about me and why I decided to kind of join this campaign really. Within the first few minutes of a positive pregnancy test, I knew exactly what kind of parent I wanted to be. My children would be birthed and then raised naturally. They would spend the majority of their time outdoors, falling in love with nature and the natural world. Animals and plants would ignite their imagination and sense of adventure, and they would naturally become advocates for the well-being of all animals and the natural world. Ours would not be a house full of stuff, and they would be inattentive to technology. When I imagined the lifestyle that I wanted to create for my children, I was inspired by my most precious childhood memories, all of which were outdoors, playing in gardens, parks, woodland and countryside. I would think of the time I met my first hedgehog, or the time I watched foxgloves play on the lawn in the evening sun. But in the last 3 years, I have learned that in reality, a simple and natural upbringing was actually hard to find. And so now I question why, in Sheffield, the outdoor city, was I finding it so hard to spend time outside, inspiring a love of nature in my little one. And I think that the short answer is, this city has a complete lack of accessible wildlife-enriched wild spaces. In 2005, Richard Louv published the book Last Child in the Woods and coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. Louv suggests that we have an inherent need to be connected to and feel part of nature. When we are denied the fulfillment of that need, we experience physical and mental disease. The book describes in great detail the grave impacts of a life spent indoors in front of TVs, computers, video games, phones, social media platforms, all on a young life. He references many studies which so far have shown the lack of time spent outside in green wild spaces will lead to an increase in childhood obesity, vitamin D deficiency, a reduction in physical fitness and cardiorespiratory health, and an increase in mental health illness. I think it's the statistic about children's mental health which shocks me the most. In 2017, 18,000 children under the age of 12 in the UK were prescribed antidepressants. Other more recent studies also link technology use to short-sightedness and sleep disturbance. But it's not the physical and mental health and well-being of my children. That's not the only reason I want the council to declare and then subsequently act upon the declaration of a biodiversity emergency. The 2012 Natural Childhood Report by Stephen Moss, commissioned by the National Trust, highlights other worrying points. In particular, a quote from Dr. William Bird. The critical age of influence appears to be before 12 years. Before this age, contact with nature in all its forms, but in particular wild nature, appears to strongly influence a positive behaviour towards the environment. And in the words of David Attenborough, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So what does that mean for the future of environmentalism and the environment? It's not just children who need nature, nature needs children too. Louv concludes, if we are going to save environmentalism and the environment, we must also save an endangered species, the child in nature. We need our children to fall in love with nature and all the benefits it can give them to ensure that the next generation continues to care for all that we are fighting to save. So what are the barriers that prevent young families from connecting with nature? Well, the list is long and multifaceted. For the majority of us that live within a city, we no longer live as if we are part of nature. Instead, it is something that is out there that we visit. And when we do visit it, we may or may not interact with it. In just one generation, a child's freedom has reduced significantly because of dangerously fast and busy traffic levels and a parent's fear of stranger danger. Our kids are now completely reliant on an adult to have the time, inclination and means of taking them to nature. Parents of young children are sleep deprived and exhausted. We need wild spaces on our doorstep and ones in which children are permitted to explore. Wildlife reserves in our city are few and far between, and these require extra time to travel to and a car to travel in. Technology, as previously discussed, is nature's biggest competitor for our children's attention. Our outdoor spaces now need to be more enthralling than ever. A family's socio-economic status will dictate the amount of time, energy, knowledge of importance and funds that they have to dedicate to spending time outdoors. So even the weather can become a barrier between children and nature if a family can't afford appropriate outdoor wear. Environmental racism exists. Children of colour are disproportionately affected by all the adverse effects of not spending time in wild spaces and all the barriers that stand in the way. I'm a full-time mum by choice, but perhaps I'm also an endangered species. Most children now attend nursery, preschool and then school. A child's free time is considerably reduced, and the type of environment that they spend the majority of time in is dependent on which early years setting they attend. Most would be indoors, with some time spent in concrete playgrounds. Forest schools are few and far between and often too expensive to be inclusive to all. If we are to ensure that all children have equal access to wild spaces, it is wrong to assume that families have the time or economic means to create their own wildlife gardens. We are a city that is full of parks and recreation grounds, but we have no wild spaces. And wildlife beyond a squirrel, pigeon or blackbird is hard for a small child to spot. So I have to ask, for a society that is suffering from chronic nature deficit disorder and one that is in a state of climate and ecological emergency, why aren't we managing parks, recreation grounds and other green areas of land like precious wild spaces? Instead, our parks usually consist of uninspiring green fields that are mown too short, too frequently, earmarked for team sports and covered in dog poop. We have structured playgrounds that do not encourage imaginative, naturalistic play and exploration. And this type of play is so important for building a child's resilience, creativity, problem-solving skills, and ingenuity. When you do find a bit of wild space or some trees to climb, you will often find signs that say keep to the footpath and don't climb the trees, which are all well-meaning, but again, distance kids from interacting with nature. Pesticides are sprayed frequently in parks, including on and around children's play equipment, potentially causing serious health problems in our children and definitely contributing significantly to biodiversity loss and the decline of nature in our parks. School playgrounds are mostly uninspiring concrete, even though research has shown that a green view from a window can significantly increase a child's concentration and focus. So why doesn't every school have green walls around playground perimeters? So what could green-minded parents contribute to the restoration of nature in our city? We can't escape technology. I wouldn't suggest we even try. The sleep deprivation and exhaustion from juggling busy family lives, it's just part of the course. But I do believe that the great outdoors can compete with technology and provide a tonic for the exhaustion. When nature is in abundance, it is more exciting, enthralling and memorable than any kind of technology, and its positive effects are tangible and long-lasting. The benefits of nature are felt by everyone. Families are multi-generational, consist of every ethnicity and are from every socio-economic background. Nature can and does connect us all. We need habitats for nature to thrive in doorstep accessible areas for families to enjoy. We need our inherent need for connection to nature to be realised, and we need nature and nature needs us. Sheffield is full of community-led groups and organisations that want to do more in and for nature. Kids Plant Trees is an example of a new community group that organises events for families to get outside, planting trees, creating and caring for woodland. The uptake from volunteers has been phenomenal. Multi-generational, cross-faith, ethnically diverse and from all economic backgrounds. Give families the space to be wild in the wild and they will come. They will love it and they will continue to protect it for the future. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Sorry, you're all on mute. Well, yeah, if you could see hands. I'm not going to keep unmuting. We'll have a big round of applause right there. But thank you, Rachel. Much brilliant. Really good.
Really
Great start.
Thank you.
Next, like I say, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat box and you can ask, we'll ask them at the end. Like I say, that's when we're going to do it. So we're going to have a few words from Lindy Stone. Lindy Stone is from Sheffield Friends of the Earth. She's just about to share her screen. They were one of the groups who've decided to create these petitions. So in your own time, Lindy, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting us. Okay, so it might seem a bit odd that we've got two petitions running at the same time. I just think really it's a question of great minds think alike, because through last autumn, Sheffield Friends of the Earth were thinking quite a lot about this, and the desire that we would all have to just get rid of that, to declare an ecological emergency. And Dawn asked me to think through the thinking behind this. Well, partly it was to do with other councils were doing it, Bristol most notably, but also Doncaster, close to us, declared a climate and an ecological emergency together. The Wildlife Trust very much inspired us, and Liz is going to speak later. And we had done lots of reading and lots of thinking and lots of talking. Main thing is, if you don't name it, you don't note it. That's why we want Sheffield to declare an ecological emergency, really. There's lots of headlines around. Look at this, technology rules. We know we're fighting a climate emergency. We know that that's been declared by the council, and we know that soon we will see some of the plans towards how it's going to be addressed, and hopefully some of these things will come up in it as well. A lot of stuff, though, is on technology. So there's one here, look, from Sky News, climate change, 7 technology solutions that could help solve the crisis that we're facing. Of various strengths, the first, carbon capture, okay, feeding cows seaweed, delicious insects. The bottom 3 I think we've heard of before. Climate repair was an interesting one. It's all about making the poles freeze over again by creating additional clouds. It's a really way out there sort of technology, but there it was. Looking further, this is a much more serious concern, reflection. The House of Commons Library, so this is government sort of policy, if you like, climate change solutions, the role of technology. And this is some of the stuff they said just in the executive summary at the beginning. The UK government's approach, hold your tempers here, is to create a favourable environment for the private sector to invest. They expect to spend 2.5 billion on developing low carbon technology. And then below in red, the sorts of things they're looking at. So energy systems, offshore renewable energy, industrial decarbonisation, carbon capture, renewables, electric batteries. And they're right at the bottom, nuclear fusion, which has been slow to develop. And of course, not forgetting hydrogen, about which there is a great deal of talk. So lots of stuff out there. But also in that same report, there's this notion of techno-optimism. There are doubts about the extent to which technological breakthroughs can or should be relied upon to mitigate climate change. They're relying on unproven technologies a lot of the time, and there is an over-reliance on these negative emissions technologies, which could present significant risks to emission reduction plans if the technologies fail to materialise, and we know that that could happen. So they also finish up on this executive bit. There are many possible combinations of approaches to preventing the worst effects of global warming, and it's likely that technology will play a role, but it is also likely to be part of a wider approach incorporating nature-based solutions and lifestyle changes. So nature-based solutions, that's the first time we're seeing this alongside lots and lots of stuff about how technology is going to save us all. Further on in our debates and discussions, we're seeing all these sorts of things around, aren't we? How nature is good for our health and happiness, how we are wired to be outside, how noticing nature is the greatest gift you can get from lockdown, and how nature must lead the way to a resilient post-COVID future. All of these things we talked about, all of these things we believed in, all of these things we know to be important. And here's something from the World Economic Forum. They say that a race to zero CO2 emissions needs to be coupled with nature positive investment to tackle environmental challenges and support an economic recovery. This is not an either or, it's a both. And nature-based solutions, including natural climate solutions, can address both climate and nature goals. These things matter, these things are important. But some solutions are counterproductive. This is Drax, which Drax Power Station now burns wood pellets for energy, or it will do soon. 4 out of 6 of their generators were burning wood rather than coal, and coal is soon to go if it hasn't gone already. So that's on our doorstep, isn't it? But they're burning wood pellets. We know that to counter climate change, we need to stop burning things. This is not good. You burn carbon, it is released into the atmosphere. That is not good. We know that bioenergy, even with carbon capture and storage, which is not a proven technology yet, what are we going to do with the rest of it? We know it's bad for our climate, and it would lead to increased forest destruction, such as this. This is a forest in Estonia, which has been chopped down in order to be turned, for the fuel to be turned into bioenergy. Old trees taken away from birds, insects, fungi and lichen to keep the lights on at the gas station. It's ugly, an unnecessary collision, they say, of different policies at play. So don't burn coal anymore, no more fossil fuels. Oh, I know what we'll do, we'll burn wood instead. That then destroys the ecosystem. And we know that biodiversity is in a crisis. More headlines here, including a study from the University of Copenhagen, which says biodiversity crisis is worse than climate change. Experts say it's certainly running alongside it. And we know that there's been a damning government report recently about the UK's biodiversity loss. So these things came together then, and also working within our context of the National Friends of the Earth, who are doing a lot of work on nature at the moment, and making the point, this is from an article on their website, nature is essential to our lives, from the food on our plates to the clothes we wear, from medicines to mental health benefits. And we know about how important those things are, as Rachel has just been highlighting so very, very clearly. Are you getting enough nature, they say? We'd all like to probably get more. And at the bottom though, again, the latest State of Nature report shows that over half our wild species, plants, insects, birds and mammals, are in decline. The specifics of those sorts of things, perhaps Liz will be picking up shortly, but they matter a great deal to us. Our Friends of the Earth at national level, a 2021 priority is developing a nature campaign. We've already done stuff over the years about the decrease in the bee population and in the importance of doubling tree cover. That was a big focus last year. What's causing animal extinction, these habitat loss, pollution, how we farm, all these ideas are being developed, and we're going to be working on different priorities as the year goes on. So, declaring an ecological emergency, we think, is part of this to be taken seriously at a local level. If you don't name it, you don't note it. So come on, Sheffield, name it. That's where we want to get to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lindy. That was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next presentation is from Liz Ballard, who is from the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. As I keep saying, if you've got any questions, put them there in the chat box, and we'll be doing that at the end. So in your own time, Liz, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. So is that coming through okay? Can someone give me a yes or a thumbs up?
Yes.
Yeah, we
Great.
can. Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me here. That's you know, it's really great to see that this issue is gathering momentum in Sheffield, so it's fantastic. So yes, I'm from Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, and we're a local charity. We have about 6,000 members, and we're part of a network of wildlife trusts across the country, and we very much see ourselves as part of the community. And what we do is we protect and look after and conserve special places and wildlife, and manage spaces for local people to access. We engage people of all ages, connecting them to nature, and we take action for nature through campaigning and a lot of our influencing work as well. And as part of this, in the autumn, we gave a presentation as part of our work with the Green City Partnership Board about the need for an ecological emergency to be declared in Sheffield. And this is really kind of following on from that work. So I apologise if some of you may have seen this before, but the essence of the content of the issue is the same, whoever I speak to. And it's an abbreviated version for tonight. So I just wanted to pick up on the kind of higher level stuff, which is kind of the UN level stuff, where we're heading towards a COP15, which is actually the biodiversity COP in May this coming year, the Convention on Biodiversity. And that's taking a stock of what's been happening over the last decade for biodiversity. And there was a recent report in preparation for this, which states that the diversity of species, between species and of ecosystems, is declining faster than at any time in human history. So that loss of species has been quite clearly evidenced through quite a large data analysis, and there's very clear information about that. And we hear talk of the 6th mass extinction and the evidence for that. And in 2010, the UN set targets globally for biodiversity recovery by 2020, and they probably all thought that was a really long time. They had 10 years to sort that out. But unfortunately, of those 20 targets today, only 6 have been partially met. And the rest have failed. So there's a lot of taking stock at the moment going on in preparation for the next decade, which is why COP15 around biodiversity is really important. Unfortunately, the UK is no different in that international picture. The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So we see that the UK has failed on the same targets. We've partially met 4 to 6 targets on biodiversity. So we're not leading the way nationally on the international stage either. But let's just sort of now home in on closer to home. And we kind of worked hard a couple of years ago on the Sheffield State of Nature report, which highlighted quite a number of issues and made a number of recommendations. And I'd really recommend that you take a look at that. It's on our website, and it's one of the most current comprehensive assessments of the data and case studies for wildlife and habitats in Sheffield. So please, I would recommend you look at that, because in terms of what happens next for nature, that's very much a place to draw information from. And in that, we kind of recognised a number of the classic issues that our wildlife is suffering from in Sheffield. So, for example, habitat fragmentation. So this is a map of Sheffield and Rotherham ancient woodlands. You can see how fragmented it is. And that fragmentation has been ongoing, and we were working to save Smithy Wood, which is a picture on the right, and Greenough Woods, our nature reserve on the left, very similar habitats, all part of that same ancient woodland originally that have gradually been eroded over time. And saving these remaining fragments is so critical. So habitat fragmentation through the loss of sites through planning and development, but also where we are seeing sites recovering, and a lot of you will know about Althorpe proposed planning application, where we're seeing sites recovering, they still remain under threat as well. So there's opportunities for nature to recover, but we need to recognise those and protect those just as much as our existing habitats and important areas for wildlife. We have internationally important moorlands on our doorstep in Sheffield. This is a kind of aerial view of the Dark Peak SSSI, really important protected site for nature and wildlife, and yet it's intensively managed and a degraded landscape in terms of nature and the habitat, and its ability to capture water and all those ecosystem services that have been talked about in terms of flood risk management and water quality. Species are under threat, persecution, both illegal persecution and what's considered acceptable persecution, in the sense that you can snare, shoot and trap wildlife. And we have a kind of plethora of issues to do with hunting and shooting on our moorlands. We also know from the State of Nature report that are in our nature assets, and this work of this map is really key for helping us direct and target our investment in nature. And these tools are readily available to us if we use them. So in terms of what we can do, we must act locally, which is why it's so important to act at a Sheffield level. We need to think about the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. They need climate and ecological solutions that come together. That's really important. As other speakers have said, one can contradict the other. So we need to declare a climate and ecological emergency, because that does raise the profile, leads to action. And we need a nature recovery strategy for Sheffield, which might include some of these things. I won't go through them all, but for example, key species conservation plans, increased access to nature for all, investing in our natural capital. Those kind of activities would be work streams within such an action plan. We need more, bigger and better joined up landscape. We need to be able to protect land, and we're trying to do some of this already, but we need to expand this work. We look at land, not when we look at it aerially from a bird's eye view, we don't see the boundaries of local authorities and landowners. We see a kind of massive landscape. That's how nature sees it. That's how nature is. There aren't those hard boundaries. So we need to look much more collaboratively about how land is used. We need to look at how we can connect nature better so it can recover and be more resilient. And we're working on a lot of this already in preparation for a nature recovery strategy. We're looking at nature recovery networks for Sheffield. We need to be really looking quite big scale, but locally. Yes, road verges, back gardens, little green spaces, they can all add to improving biodiversity and helping people access nature. And this is a road verge that we managed to change the management regime on for Sheffield. And we need to be bold, we need to be brave and think about the species that we could bring and introduce into Sheffield that we've lost. Pine marten, beaver, could we do all of that? So to finish, well, how do we do this? Well, once we've declared an ecological emergency, and actually I kind of was on the meeting today, this morning, the Green City Partnership, and very much said, we kind of are cracking on with this anyway. We're not waiting for Sheffield Council to declare an ecological emergency. We at the Trust are certainly getting on with it and hope others will too. But what the ecological emergency does is it raises the profile, it gives us momentum, it focuses everyone on the nature recovery approach that we need. And also it means that the council looks right across all its activities, not just its parks and countryside, but planning is so critical, rural estates, how we manage water, the whole kind of aspect of the council's work needs to be considered. So we're hoping to take that forward through partnership working and more community activism and engagement. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, are we unmuted? Yeah, we are. Brilliant, thank you. That was a fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. John Grant, who is a member of the Adaptation and Resilience Committee. In case you're wondering what that is, I'm sure John will tell you all about it. So in your own time, John, when you are ready.
Well, hello everybody. Let me just share my screen. Can I get a thumbs up if that's okay? Can you see my ugly mug there? Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I've got to say, yeah, I know it's spelt wrong. Yeah, I know that. It's a bit of a joke with regards to me being dyslexic and I'm always spelling stuff wrong, but it works really well with regards to the acronym that of the team of scientists in Sheffield Hallam University that are working to kind of outreach what is an attempt at bringing people up to speed on all things biodiversity and climate change. And really today, thanks so much, Liz, for showing us that focused, looking at the specifics down in Sheffield. I'm going to do a classic kind of lecturer attempt to try and cover everything and start at a global stage here. I'm really sorry. I won't go over 10 minutes though, Dawn, I promise. Okay, so and the question really is like, will we do anything? Can we and will we? But first of all, I want to touch on the will we. But first, I just want to give a big thanks to because I've researched loads of other people's work with regards to this, and just wanted to give a hats off to you know, and one person that I just wanted to name check before I move on is Eunice Foote, the mother of science of climate change, who actually started all of this. It wasn't John Tyndall, I'm sorry to say that, but it was a woman. Who knew? Nobody, which is a bit frustrating for me, but there we go. Right, so moving on to another woman who I've got a lot of time for, Lucille Clifton, poet, artist, and philosopher, and she sort of like says, you've got to visualize what you want. If you're going to get people to change, you have to visualize what you've got to get them to do. And so I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to fly through the early parts as well, and you'll realize in a moment why. But about why don't people act boldly? Liz just challenged us with acting boldly, but you know, barring a few individuals, everyone just makes excuses why we don't. And I think there's actually a physiological reason for that, I'm afraid, which is why it's so tough. And it's a long story, so I'm going to speed up. And it goes back to about 2 million years ago, when the ice ages started, and humans were but a twinkle in the eye of a primate in a tree somewhere. And what happened was the land changed, and humans, or our really great ancestors, were really challenged in this Rift Valley in Africa. And it was a brutal climate, very dry, very hot. I know that I said ice ages, but we're in the Rift Valley here. And humanity about 300,000 years ago stabilized in this environment and scattered across the world. After we did that, we were adventurers. We traveled, and why and how? Because for once the evolution went with the big brain option. I know you might know some people where you would deny that, but it's true. It's true. We have a very large brain, and we can imagine things. And in this climate, in this harsh climate, we became very selfish, because you kind of do. And you always wanted more. And it was a real challenge. And we became super smart, smarter than any animal. And you know, I always find it kind of interesting, because 200 and because we call ourselves wise ape or wise man, which really offends me, but Homo sapiens, and I really disagree with that. I'm going to actually say that we're not wise apes. In fact, if we look at the latter stage there, I would call us smart apes. And what do they look like? Well, there's a bit of a joke there, but this is what smart apes function like. They're not the nicest, but ultimately that desire, that selfish desire to always have more, is kind of self-destructive, and we're seeing that, and you know, we can do better than this. Now, the good news is that sapiens, as I like to call them, and I would say that all of the people watching today are probably sapiens. They're the wise ones, but it is this trait that we all have, that we kind of want to feel safe, and I don't think that's unfair, but it's a characteristic of who we are. And to feel safe, we want more, and it's a deep-seated desire, and so we push our smart, our technology as far as we can. And about 10,000 years ago, the world became the most stable, beautiful place ever. You know, the temperatures stabilized, and those smart apes did something amazing. They invented agriculture. And then they pushed that technology. And it was interesting that technology was raised, that we're still looking to technology to save us. And it's like ridiculous. It's not going to, but it doesn't stop us trying. And here's a graph showing how we've built our own ecosystem for humans. We call it urbanization in the university, but that's what we've done. We've created this. Even though we are creatures of the wild, we actually, for safety reasons, I think, but certainly for efficiency reasons and breeding success, we've gone with urbanization, but it has an impact. Now, if you take the population, how wealthy we are, and our level of technology, and you draw 3 axes with this, I know it's a little bit, it's called the IPAT equation, and it's 1970s was when it was thought about, and it's quite basic, but it's a really interesting visualization that if you draw our population along one axis, along the bottom, our technology along the other, and then vertically the wealth, you can create kind of a box, and it's really rough and it's kind of clunky, but it's interesting, I think. And back in 1900, the entire global economy was worth 2 trillion, and you can see that little box. In 1950, it was worth 5.3 trillion. In 2011, it was worth 55 trillion. And if we expand it to the latest of the data that I've got, it's now at 88 trillion from 2019. And why is that? That's because of the mantra that I've written down the side there. Take, make, use, lose. Take, make, use, lose. That's what we've been doing. And the impact on our planet has been crushing. This is a research project that's been running since 1970 and has pretty much established that 60% of our vertebrate animals have been wiped out since 1970. And get this for a statistic. Of mammals, 96% are humans and animals that humans look after. So 36% of mammals are humans, and 60% of mammals are cows and sheep, and other animals that we raise. 96. So all wild mammals fall within 4%. Now, if that doesn't make you sit up and realize that we have an ecological and biodiversity emergency, then I don't know what will. We are in the middle of a 6th mass extinction, and it has to stop. But can we? Right, this is interesting. So back in 2000, I think this is 2018 data. This is a breakdown of the UK as to what the different land is used for. And you see at the bottom there that 1.5 million hectares is our urban land, and which is down here. So of all of our land in the UK, that's all the cities, right? And villages and roads and all the built up areas is 1.5 million hectares, which is, you know, that's kind of interesting. And here, that's the food that we grow for us, all the veggies, wheat, crops, vegetables, that's everything we eat that isn't meat, right? And this is the staggering thing, is that we import 41%. So let me before I do that, the pink and the yellow areas, those vast areas, the pink is grazing for livestock, and the yellow is food that we grow on the land for livestock. So that whole area of pink and yellow is all for the animals that we eat or harvest their milk. And I find that, again, if that doesn't make you sit up and think, what the heck? So think about it. The orange is just for our veg and everything, which is probably more than half of our diet. And the rest is, well, it should be, you're trying to be healthy. And the rest is that. And so if we move forwards, if we stop the import, we leave the trees and the unthingy grown. And then if we extended over that vegetable to 6 million hectares, we'd be able to produce enough food for all of us without meat. Now, I know this is a hard thing, but we're going to have to own it sometime. And so that would be enough 6 million hectares would be enough to feed the population of the UK, which means we could rewild all the current grazing land and leave it to become biodiverse. We could also do the unmanaged land as well. And my idea is that should be an aspirational desire now. That should be what we're aiming for. And you know, and then of course we can go crazy and look at other things that we might, you know, double our land area and actually wild a lot. But there, I've run out of time now, and if people have a look, I've got some images that what that might look like. You know, there are ways of doing this, but I'll stop now and let me stop sharing. But we have the potential out there. The land is there, and all we're missing is the desire, the ability, the willingness to be bold and to accept that our current practices are just not sustainable.
That's brilliant. Thank you, John. Thanks for
Cheers,
that.
John. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thanks for sticking to the 10 minutes.
Yes, that was the biggest achievement of all, John. Brilliant. No, fantastic. Really appreciate that. Thank you, John. Thank you. The next speaker is Douglas Johnson. Douglas reached out to us just to point out, originally we just had Mark Jones from the council because he's the cabinet member for climate change and environment, but Douglas Johnson actually reached out to us from the Green Party, so we've managed to cram him in there. And so Douglas Johnson, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks very much then. It's very nice to have the invitation. It's a case of one thing leads to another, doesn't it? So I haven't got any lovely pictures like John's or Liz or Lindy, I'm afraid. I'm back with Rachel. I'm just going to say a few words now. But I think what's interesting is we've had some really interesting presentations there on different aspects of ecology and what it means to people. And I was just going to reflect on just how people's perceptions of ecology can just go under the radar and how people take so much for granted. And then when it's gone, and it's a problem. It can so easily slip away if we don't deal with it now. So I'm a councillor for City Ward, which is kind of unfortunate really, because City Ward, it covers, you know, the middle of the city. We're very short on green space, and you know, lots of building there, not much green space at all. Actually, it does mean that when people are looking at biodiversity, they really appreciate what other people see as weeds and with, you know, overgrown buddleias with small birds pottering about in them. So, and I'll mention something about that later. But I was just thinking about some aspects of ecology and what they mean to people. So 2 weeks ago today, I was actually giving evidence to or 2 weeks tomorrow, I was giving evidence to the Owl Fort planning inquiry, and some of you will know about that. That's really interesting because it's an area where the council sold off this greenfield, a very big greenfield site for housing development. It was in the plans in the 60s and it's still there now. And there was a big campaign by people who live around that area because they faced with losing, you know, an important amenity site, but there's so much ecology there. And Liz's colleague Nikki Rivers spent a great deal of time giving very detailed evidence about how important that is, how it's been overlooked in all the planning assessments. Really important stuff there. But of course, it's being handed over to a large volume house builder that's really come up with an unimaginative estate. So in all these decisions, we're weighing up what do we gain compared with what do we lose? And the point is that the loss of the ecology is actually huge. It's these fields. Greenfield has never been built on before. Developers like that because they don't have to worry about anything like, you know, what's under the ground or land contamination. It makes it cheaper for them to build there. But what they're offering in this case was a fairly unimaginative. It was just some, you know, low density, low rise housing, the sort of thing you'd see popping up in the early 90s and think, yeah, it's a bit dismal really. And that, yeah, and I just think that's a bad trade-off for what we get there. So I was speaking out on that, and the inquiry's now closed. We're waiting for a decision. We'll see what happens when it comes in. So that was one aspect. Back in my own ward, I was just cycling through Highfield the other day, and I was cycling, and I just stopped because I heard all these birds chattering away. And it was just the sort of really loud bird noise that just made you stop. I mean, it literally did make me stop. I went to have a look and see what was going on. And what it was just a garden with some, fairly overgrown bushes in them, a couple of small scrubby trees, the bushes that were growing over the fence and hanging over into the pavement. But actually, the sound coming out of these bushes told you that there was so much going on in the bird life there. And obviously the birds must be doing something. They were busy having conversations about the things that birds do in bushes. But there must be so much food in their habitat in terms of bugs and lichen and all those sort of things that ecologists know about. But it really stood out there, as I said, because it's a sort of thing that brings pleasure to people's lives, but also safeguards, that bit of space for the natural world there. So another aspect of ecology, I was contacted the other day by a journalist who rang up and said, "Can I get your comments on this huge amount of fly tipping that's just appeared in your ward? A big space bit has appeared overnight, it seems. We've had complaints from someone." So I was like, "What?" And he said, "I'll send you the picture." So I looked at the picture and I got back to him and said, "That's not fly tipping, There was a hedge there. And it's next to Hallam University, and they're doing some redevelopment of the science park there. And what they've done is it's just this low-lying hedge. Didn't look that much, really. But as part of the development, it's just been scrubbed out. And what was revealed was that all the litter has accumulated under there for weeks and years on end. And it looked really bad. It looked as though it had just had a wagon load of rubbish dumped on it. So what's significant about that is, no one noticed it before. It shows how much a hedge can hold. And obviously, we don't want loads of litter. There's no excuse for it. It's an unpleasant thing. It's selfish when people drop it. But that aside, the hedge absorbed all that litter. And it just reminds you of what's the volume of a hedge. And in amongst that, of course, there are all the small birds and worms and things like that. Hedges contain so much. That's the point about it. And of course, people talk about trees, and we all know trees are important. We like to talk about trees, but the thing is, hedges are brilliant. Hedges just contain so much. So that was the one at Hallam University. And then another issue on hedges that we had to deal with is something we challenged the council on at the time. It was 2 or 3 years ago. Amy had taken the decision to root out a whole load of hedges along all the dual carriageways in the city. It might have been from that photograph that Liz showed of the dual carriageway. But all around on the inner ring road in particular, but lots of others, there were lots of bits of hedges. And the thing is, they weren't remarkable hedges. They weren't particularly, they weren't well maintained. They weren't particularly pleasant. They weren't particularly effective as hedges. But the remnants of them were there, and there was still quite a bit of cover. And I can't remember the precise reason that was given for them taking it out, but essentially it was down to reducing the cost of maintenance. But that's critical for losing those corridors that house ecology and allows birds and animals and things like that to move around the city. In addition to that, of course, they also pick up a lot of that litter. They reduce noise pollution, they reduce air pollution. So they're very valuable things altogether. And those are just some things there. And I want to mention those because, obviously, Althorp's been a big campaign, but with the others, people do speak out about them, but not very much, not in big numbers. People tend to notice them after they've gone and then realise, oh yeah, there used to be a hedge there or whatever. And people don't think of each of these little steps as being big and important, something to speak out about. But of course, my point is that they are important. And the danger, the reason that we're facing this ecological emergency is because of this creeping loss to greyness of the natural world. That's my concern. And speaking as a city ward councillor, we see it a lot. It's inevitable that there's going to be development in the city centre. But we just need to be so careful about doing that. So that's why I fully support the ecological emergency. just the same as the climate emergency. Finally, though, I just want to say it does require more than words, and fully support. There's 2 petitions going around about calling for an ecological emergency. The council could just simply declare an ecological emergency tomorrow if it wanted to do so, and I support that. I think that's what we're all here for. But it's not enough. There needs to be more than just the words. And I'm just reflecting on that because it's almost 2 years ago that the council declared a climate emergency. And it was a very big thing then. We said, there's the Paris Agreement, the IPCC report that showed there were just 12 years left to effect, really significant change to get towards net carbon zero. Declaring a climate emergency was something that was seen as a starting point. But the point is that since then, the action has been pitifully little. And that's my concern. So as a councillor, I'm always trying to just push things in the right direction and say, let's see some action on climate change, not just talking about it. There needs to be resources diverted from one thing into climate change activity. It also needs to be dealt with in the terms of the ecological emergency, and some of the speakers suggested some of the things that you're doing there. So what I'd like to see, and what I think we need to see, is from the council point of view to embed the need for an ecological awareness and the demand for an ecological emergency, embed it into everything that the council does and bring it into the routine decision making. Someone mentioned the planning system. The planning system is huge for both the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. Those decisions are made routinely every day. I mean, they're all important decisions, but we don't yet have any adequate system for addressing either the climate or ecology in the framework for making those decisions. And those are long-term decisions, because once a hedge is cut down, once a field's built over, it's there for a long time. But also just ordinary decisions. And the point is that it should be built into the way that the council does its decision making. And within a decision making framework, the council already has checklists of issues to discover to discuss and to tick off and make sure they're being considered for every formal decision. So those include, finance and legal issues and equalities and so on like that. There's various impact assessments. There's no reason why we can't have a climate impact assessment and an ecology impact assessment on each of those. They don't require a lot of work necessarily, certainly wouldn't quite require a lot of work in each decision, but they're the way that I'd recommend we go forward with this, because it's a point of flagging up to the decision maker, is there an issue here that's going to affect ecology? And if so, what is it? So going back to the point earlier, if you don't name it, you don't note it. And that's what we require the decision makers to do. So that's why I'd like to see a way forward, and that would really be helped by declaring an ecological emergency, and so that's why I support it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank
Cheers,
you very
Douglas.
much. Thank you, Douglas.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So the final speaker of the evening is Mr. Mark Jones. Mark Jones, as I said before, he is a Labour Party councillor, and he is also the Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change. So Mark Jones, in your own time, when you're ready.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. These are strange times, possibly unprecedented times indeed. As I look around at the distance audience that we have here tonight, and just shy of 80 participants at the moment, I think, I welcome you all into my home and hope you welcome me too, albeit virtually as circumstances dictate. I hope tonight finds you all warm, safe and secure. And if we do face unprecedented times, they are times of defined by, indeed, a global health emergency, one which both highlights the wonderful connectivity of humanity and the fragility of us all. The world that we've become increasingly accustomed to and reliant upon has probably and unfortunately facilitated the speed with which SARS coronavirus emerged and spread. We face an economic emergency which if it was looming, we would prepare for, but it isn't. Economic emergency is already far too real for far too many. The unemployment emergency that goes hand in hand with that economic emergency is already up on us too. Sheffield's claimant counts are significantly increasing already because of COVID-19. We face an emergency in housing and the other side of that coin, homelessness. And we face a climate emergency, as many of the speakers have already alluded to in their presentations tonight. And yes, we have indeed declared a climate emergency, and the report that was taken to the Green City Partnership Board earlier is going some way to try and address what needs to be done in the action plans and what the scale of the challenge is ahead of us. And the climate emergency is one driven, as others have commented on the consumption of fossil fuels, as we all strive to the pursuit of more stuff, not just for those with too little stuff, because there are many indeed that could do with more, but also more stuff for us with too much. And inextricably linked to the climate emergency is indeed the ecological emergency. The ecological emergency is championed with authority and presence, as has already been commented by David Attenborough, who beams into our homes for all of us to watch and highlighted the global challenges faced by nature. But we are all aware of the significance of biodiversity loss occurring on our own doorstep through acts of sometimes misguided benevolence or occasionally wanton disregard. We are all likely to have contributed to the loss of biodiversity. Though I paint a bewilderingly dystopian scene, it is one that I believe to be true and accurate, and I think it is reflected in the comments of previous commentators here tonight. So, what has the council done? What is it doing, and what are we going to do? Is pretty much where we're at the moment, and what you're all here to hear. The Council recognises the global, national and regional loss of biodiversity, as referenced in the State of Nature report, and that this continued loss of biodiversity will have significant impact on the people of Sheffield and the wider environment indeed. So if we look at what the Council's doing with a broad brush, as it were, making the Council's green estate and specifically parks and open spaces, as referred to, more hospitable to a range of native plants and animals as part of the Urban Nature Project is something we are striving to. But we do face conflicting challenges. For instance, a request to increase the lights and the hours that lights are used in parks so that people can travel around them safely at night. This is a conflicting element of what we need to do with a biological, ecological crisis, because ultimately that light pollution will affect nesting birds, and we know the impact it has. The myriad of phytoplankton pathogens, not the easiest thing to say, is something the Council has been monitoring and dealing with. We are developing strategies to mitigate the impact of both climate change and resilience to further tree diseases. For instance, with an officer in this meeting tonight, we recently did a site visit, and we discussed the Phytoporphyria ramorum, which has finally made its way into Sheffield's larch trees. This is going to require uprooting of larch trees in the woodlands and possibly clearance of rhododendron and other proximal vector species. Planning for the replacement of those trees and sustainable broadleaf and coniferous species is ongoing. But equally is the acknowledgement that leaving those uprooted trees in situ with their root plates exposed does create new environments, microenvironments, albeit, but new environments for species to thrive in. That kind of way of managing our woodland is very much in the forefront of our thinking, and is something that we are looking to ensure continues. Through planning and regional development, we are seeking to embed biodiversity net gain and district level licensing, for instance, to the benefit, hopefully, of the great crested newts. And this is to be carried forward within the planning system. In conjunction with partners, we are developing nature conservation strategies and natural capital mapping and nature recovery networks. We must and we will continue to work in partnership across the city to build upon the great knowledge of our city, there's much wealth and capacity in our city, and we recognise that. The council doesn't hold all the answers here. We do have some of the knowledge and we do have some of the expertise, but so does the rest of the city, and we must bring that all together. We are constantly reviewing the council's use of herbicides. Trials are constantly ongoing on physical and chemical means to remove unwanted, as they are often termed, and possibly destructive plants from our highways. I believe pelargonic acid, which is a component of a trade product, Caltoon Gold, is currently being trialled. Those trials have yet to conclude, and I am hopeful that they will lead on to something positive, as though it's still a herbicide, it is at least an organic material that shouldn't have such detrimental environmental impact as glyphosates, for instance. Connecting people to nature through respectful use of our land remains a challenge. Liz showed a picture of Redmires. It was the woods up at Redmires that I visited with officers, and while we were there, we discussed the issues that Redmires had recently seen. It was great to see people enjoying our wild areas and gaining access to the footpaths up onto the moors. However, the disruption, damage and detritus that can be left behind is an unwelcome artefact of that greater use. Indeed, closer to home, just almost literally across the road from me, Loxley and Wadsley Common, have seen a significant increase in usage. Footpath erosion, wear and tear is all too plain for everyone to see. So Sheffield Council has a significant role the state has alluded to. As more and more of our tenant farmers look to move away from agriculture through age in some cases and through other reasons besides, we are looking to retain that farmland and reimagine that land can be used for what that land can be used for. Increasing biodiversity and further seeking to protect our green belt, that essential green lung that wraps around us and nurtures us all. And we are building on actions already taken to identify as part of the Council's declaration of a climate emergency. Significant bids are currently going to the government to develop greater nature-based solutions through natural flood management. Sheffield is already a national and international leader in its greater green developments. We aim to be equally the national and indeed international exemplar of natural flood management. These aspirations are not something said easily or whimsically. They are something that we are doing, and regionally Sheffield is recognised for its desire to deliver more and pursue greater natural flood measures and nature-based solutions, including the attraction of officers from the Environment Agency who've seen what we are doing here in Sheffield. And finally, there is also the pressing question of managing invasive species. Liz mentioned this in her commentary, and to some extent you could say the tree pathogens are one of those invasive species, microfauna and microflora, something that we all too often forget, but Green Councillor mentioned in the Green City Partnership Board earlier. The way that we address these invasive species will be critical. Are they truly invasive species? Are they species we need to eradicate? Are they species we need to be embracing as part of our future biome? Is something I'm still unsure on, and I'm sure many will have views on. And indeed, Japanese knotweed is a particularly invasive species. However, it has been suggested that we could use a biological agent, a beetle, to deal with the knotweed. This is something that I'm rightly wary of, from the old lady who swallowed the spider to deal with the fly she'd swallowed, and the countless failures of biological control measures that we've seen throughout history. We must at all times try to do no harm and be wary of good intentions. Urgency is indeed needed, but haste can be immensely damaging. There are many complex issues that we must tackle, and I've found listening to those here who've already spoken helpful and informative, and giving me food for thought. And I'm looking forward to learning from everyone else here just what the ecological emergency means in its entirety and what our collective efforts can do to address it. And I'd like to thank you for listening patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Mark. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
You.
So what we'll do now, thank you to all the speakers, all fantastic. Really appreciate it. So what we're going to do now, Dawn is going to, there's some questions in the chat, and Dawn's just going to go through a few of them to some of the speakers. So
yeah, apologies if we don't get through them all, but there are quite a few and they're still coming in, so just bear with us. So the first question was from Bronwyn Barber to Liz Bollard. She's saying, we have a Sheffield Wildlife Trust report from 2018. Why don't we build on that rather than start from scratch? Can't see Liz. Are you there?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I don't think is that a question. I think that's a statement. I said that in my presentation. I totally agree. We have the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust State of Nature report for Sheffield that lots of partners were involved in, and there's a lot in there. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of case studies, there's a lot of recommendations. The next step is to turn it into an action plan and make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. The next question is from Jemima, and this is to Douglas. So what practical things, Douglas, can be done to stop the council from spraying glyphosates in the streets?
Okay, well, glyphosate, I mean, it's something that we're continually asking questions about, and I mean, to be fair to council officers, you know, they're reducing what they do to a minimum. And obviously our concern is that, you know, people are being asked to handle dangerous chemicals there, so it's not good for anyone. I mean, Mark's probably in a better position to answer that, so I wouldn't want him to be deprived of the spot to do that, being that, you know, Mark's the cabinet member for glyphosate and a few other things, whereas I'm an opposition member and, you know, not in, I don't have any direct control over what people do in the council. But I mean, yeah, I think it is something where, yeah, we've been pushing, and actually with all of us, what we're doing by putting the spotlight on things like this is to make everyone involved question, does this really need to be done? And, you know, to be fair, there are legitimate arguments why some people want to use glyphosate. I don't buy them myself, but, you know, they are proper arguments. So Mark, do you want to say anything before I chat on too much?
No, Doug. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll come in there. I enjoy listening to you there, Doug. There are some things that we do need to measure off, and weeds in the wrong place are all the same, still weeds. So weeds that grow up between the edges of our curbstones and our roads will eventually degrade that tarmac and cause us to have to take costly carbon interventions to put that right. So it is something that we have been trialling for quite a while, from the physical burning of weeds, not necessarily ideal, to the mechanical scrubbing of materials to try and remove those weeds. They've all been trialled, steam cleaning, all sorts of elements. Glyphosate is something we are looking to eradicate as much as we can and as early as we can. And as I alluded to, pelagonic acid is a component of a herbicide that's used on the continent. We are trialling it. The trial was somewhat delayed here in Sheffield because government hadn't licensed it for use on hard surfaces, which obviously includes our roads and pavements. So though ideally I'd not like to use herbicides wherever possible, there are times when we do need to use them, and we will continue to do that. I'm hopeful that this trial of this relatively expensive agent will come forward. The pelagonic acid does effectively burn the weed. It's a contact herbicide, so it wouldn't necessarily be sprayed other than in close proximity, and it should be limited to the plant that it's based upon. So should hopefully limit off-target poisoning of other foliage in that proximity. There is a great debate to be had as to what's a weed and what's not a weed, but any plant in the wrong place can still damage some of the infrastructure that we all come to rely on. So hopefully we finally got a solution here for glyphosate.
Lovely. Okay, the next question came in from Joy, and it was when they were drawing up the plans for the Sheffield City Plan Consultation document, there didn't seem to be anything that covered biodiversity in that document at all. Is there any plans to include that at a later stage? Is there anything that can be done to adopt that now? I think that's going to be down to you, Mark.
The current plan that's out there, there is reference to biodiversity and certainly biodiversity gain. Whether it's felt that it could have a more prominent feature is very much open to discussion, and the consultation and the responses that reflect that prioritisation of that element of the planning process are absolutely welcome. So I'm not entirely sure it's fair to say it's missing from the current consultation document. I'm sure there's an entire section labelled biodiversity, but there is any comments that people want to make on that of any nature are always welcome, and actually that they'll feed into the mix.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is from Joe Miller, and this question is open to anyone who wants to answer. So acknowledging that there is an emergency and a need to protect and restore nature, can we create a National Nurture Service, an NNS, in which recruiting and training local people will be a part of? Yeah, we'll just be a part of including training of local people to do that. Does anybody want to answer that one?
I mean, I'll say something if you like. Sounds like a great initiative, but of course it's a national one, and so you know, from my point of view, I try and confine most of my efforts to what's local. Think as in the sense of thinking globally or possibly even nationally, but acting locally. But it does sound like a great idea. Anything that gets the you know, more people in a movement to think more about the need for nature has got to be welcomed. That's a great one, Joan.
Thank you,
Okay,
Douglas.
lovely. Okay, the next question is from Wendy. So the question is to the councillors. It says, in fact, intensification of agriculture is responsible for much loss of biodiversity. Can you assure us that the City Council-owned farms, forestry and moorlands will remain in the ownership of the city and that they will be managed to protect and enhance biodiversity? Selling this land is likely to result in ending up in the hands of owners who won't look after the natural attributes and will be looking for profit rather than public goods. Drive the decision on how that will be how it will be managed.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one and then give way to Doug if so needed. Yes, we have been stung in the past where we have sold off farmland, and simple things like actually ploughing against the gradient instead of with the gradient, which had been traditional farming practices while it was under our stewardship, were abandoned despite the landowners taking on. So the council has been burned by selling that land. Recently, when farmers have come to retire or other things, or give up the use of their farmland, certainly recent case most, though we sold off the actual farmland building to the farmer to remain as a resident, the actual farmland itself was retained by the council. The focus being on developing that area for biodiversity, be it a combination of woodland, meadow and bogland. So that is at the forefront of our thinking, and it's a policy that we're currently pursuing and sticking to, because you're absolutely right. Once we pass that land on, regardless of promises or covenants, it's really difficult to uphold that desire to use that land for wider gains.
Okay. All right.
I'd say a little bit about that. I mean, I think that the Sheffield Council's got a bit of a strange relationship with its farmland. And it's not surprising because Sheffield's a big city. Cities don't have farms, but actually Sheffield does. I mean, it is something that seems to be kind of complicated for officers who've got that job. And I know that I've been having this long-running inquiry for some fairly basic information with officers about finding out what is known about the farms that the council is landlord of, and they seem to be really struggling to be able to say that. I think there are just 12 farms in council ownership now, but that is really the extent of the information they got. And what I really want to know is in what sort of form they're held in terms of the tenancies, the types of lease, what sort of degree of control the council has over that, and what the sort of general plan is for those farming areas. But in a more general sense, in terms of farms, I think it's worth questioning what we mean by intensification. I think it's a really interesting issue because it is quite tempting to sort of jump into the idea of intensified farming when you look at things like very big arable farms down south or in Lincolnshire, where there quite plainly has been so much destruction done to any sort of living ecological environment. And it's kind of different when you're out on peatland farms. It's a very different sort of landscape, and also with a different history. And I think what it means is that the council as landowner here has got a really important role to think in as a long-term project. What's going to be the stewardship of those pieces of land, and what opportunities are coming up, and how should they manage? And they do need to be done on an individual basis. And the thing about the ecology is that because it is so individual to each location, and then it's you can't have a one-size-fits-all policy. If you're interested in farming stuff, I think some really interesting readings. Anyone's come across a writer called James Rebanks, who is a Lakeland farmer who's on a traditional farm. It was his father and grandfather's farm, but where he's totally embraced the whole point of looking after land and rejected a lot of the farming reforms that came along since the 1930s and 1940s to think about what's really needed. There's some really, really good insights there from someone who actually knows about farming, but also knows about ecology and land use and how to look after the place. So lots of interesting thought there. No one-size-fits-all answer, I'm afraid.
Okay, lovely, thank you for that. Next question comes from Jill, and this is going to Mark. So Mark, how would you suggest that we improve the planning system to take into consideration ecological and climate issues?
Yes. I think, as Doug was saying, I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. The biodiversity gain, element of the planning permission that's being introduced, it is going to be important. Whether it's robust enough or rigorous enough remains an issue. For central government to give us more levers and more control and more autonomy as a city over what we do with our land and our environment would greatly help. As Doug was saying, he gave some evidence at the Althorpe development inquiry. When a planning permission comes to the council and should we reject it, it's always able to be open to challenge. And regardless of what the will is of the citizens of Sheffield, national decisions can trump our desires. So anything that can do to devolve that power down to the city and down to the residents is really, really important. Within the planning permissions currently, there is the bit that if a planning application comes in that is contrary to what residents want and what local people want, simply lodging a complaint against that planning application is quite powerful, because under legislation currently, any objections remain on record, so that where developers, and this does happen far too frequently, come in, buy tracts of land and then seek planning permission so they can flip it on for a massive profit to themselves without actually doing any developments of any nature. It is really important that people put in application objections to make sure that that doesn't allow the value of that land to increase, because we are in an arms race with the developers, and the greater control to the citizens of Sheffield will almost certainly make the single biggest change to anything we can do.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through. We've got lots of questions, and I'm sorry, I know for definite we're not going to be able to get to the end of the evening with being able to answer them all. So what I'm going to suggest is Anne Grange, who is one of our Greenpeace members, who does a lot of work for us. She's going to actually drop in the Greenpeace email in the inbox, and if you want your questions answering, what we're going to do is we're going to take a copy of the chat and hopefully send the questions on to the relevant people and see if we can get you an answer after. We wouldn't want to think that anyone was missing out on this evening at all. So I'm sorry if we have missed you. We'll try and get an answer for you after the evening. Yeah, okay, so there's a question from Sophie. It says, how about working with communities to care for their own roads? She's got something that she can send to everyone. I'm not quite sure what it is that she'd like to send, but is that a possibility that communities can start to care for their own roads?
Yeah, and the tree strategy is sort of evolving in that direction, and it's a working strategy. So if you feed that into the Sheffield Tree Strategy process, then maybe that's something we can get to. But yes, ownership of own roads is critical to protecting them.
I think it does go further. I mean, I think in some areas it's actually happening to some extent. So in my ward, in City Ward, we haven't done so well with that. In Alison Teal's ward, my councillor in Netheredge and Sharrow, she's done some really good work in setting up a Love Our Streets initiative and getting a lot of people really interested in the environment on their streets. And so, yeah, there's things that can be done there. What it's going to mean is that there's going to be a difference between different areas of the city, and disadvantaged areas is always going to have more difficulty. And it will be so good to have something from, if we had resources in the council do this, to put some of that to support local groups and residents to do the basics, get those groups together to help out in that sense. Any sort of community development and community ownership is going to be a good thing.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So I've got a comment from Graham Rowe. Thank you, Graham. It says many other councils have banned glyphosate already in their trials, and they were successful. Now, Graham, if you'd like to expand on that, if you've got any information that could be forwarded on to the council for them to have a look at, and then maybe incorporate that, that would be helpful. Okay, so sorry, I'm going through a few where I can't see all the messages at once. Yeah, so I've got a question about biodiversity. So biodiversity net gain for new developments. Completely agree that this is a good idea, especially if you have a strategic plan in place for when you want to improve biodiversity and connect habitats. Will you have this nature network plan in place soon? Also, the continued lack of complete Sheffield plan hampers these efforts, and that's from Bex from the Unwrapped. I'm assuming that's going to be down to Mark and Douglas again.
Well, completely agree with Bex there. Yeah, it is. I mean, actually, going back to the biodiversity point, the thing here is that the council could have a really strong policy on biodiversity. The complaints that we've had is that the council's local plan is out of date because it's not taken the steps needed to update it. We do all need to feed in things continue to the council to say we need really good, strong policies on maintaining biodiversity. But even so, the local plan's not going to be in place before 2024 at the earliest. And that's one of the challenges facing the council with both ecology and climate change, that by 2024, if the new policy only starts to kick in then, there's not long to go before you're aiming to be net zero in carbon in 2030, and not long before your ecology runs out. So yeah, desperate need for the local plan in so many ways.
Okay.
I think on that one, to clarify, I think the local plan is looking to be adopted in 2023 where possible, and also the local plan does give us
on the timetable.
Yeah, if the local plan does give us more of a stick with which to try and enforce stuff, it doesn't protect us absolutely, and there are positions that we can do to move forward and make decisions, and we're already doing that. So the local plan will help. It's not the be all end all, and it's not the solution to everything, unfortunately.
Okay, another, this is a comment from Bernard, but I'm just going to expand a little bit on that. And he's put, as long as Sheffield City Council's economy is driven by growth, ecology and the environment will always suffer. So are there any plans to look at a donut economy for Sheffield City Council to ensure that we don't impact on the environment quite so much, and we can actually put things back into the environment and ensure that everything, that nature continues as normal?
Yeah, so happy to on that specific one, with an officer now within the council already. 2.5 weeks ago, I think it was now, I was on a video conference with international colleagues, including the economist Detta, who works alongside Rayworth in the developing of the donut economics model. So those outreach things are ongoing. 15-minute city, the donut economy is very much in our sights, and those conversations with international academics continue.
Lovely. The next question is from Sophie, and this one is: could Sheffield Farms become community food growing projects, as is being done in Cuba? I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Yeah, well, yeah, well, obviously,
conceivably.
Into that, and yeah. A lot of council. So this is from Liz, and she's saying to, oh, sorry, that's not a question. Hang on. Okay, so this one's from Anne, and it's to Mark. By declaring an ecological emergency now, they've raised awareness with the Sheffield Green Parents. So many more people in Sheffield about what can they do or not do to help biodiversity loss. And the sooner we do it, the sooner we can see more localised and community action. Do you agree?
The simple answer is yes. We can all do more. There is a significant amount of the public realm that obviously is the council's to maintain, but there's significant amounts of private realm that we can all enhance and do stuff with already. As Liz has said, she's not waiting on the council to do stuff, neither should anybody else for that matter. When I moved into this house a couple of years back now, the previous occupant had concreted everything. So where possible, I'm stripping out that hard architecture and trying to improve the area. I've planted up the front of my garden. The back of my garden was a bit desolate due to pet rabbits. As soon as anything goes in, they eat it, but that's what rabbits do. But yeah, there's stuff that we can all do to make changes, and those small changes, incremental gains, all do come together and add great weight and benefit to everyone.
If I could add to that, I'd just say something that we can all do is just be aware and pick up on things and recognise that actually lots of people, not just on this call, but in the general public, are interested in ecology and what they see around them. And sometimes, it's up to people like us who can speak up on things to do so, and just sometimes make the point of enjoying birds and trees and woods and recreation and the outdoor environment and things that aren't too regimented. Try and talk to people about not concreting over their drives, if that's what they're trying to do, about the benefits of planting small fruit trees, or put a few bulbs in, go and do some guerrilla gardening or something. I mean, there's all the little saplings that are on the streets now. They could definitely do with some spring bulbs put in them. I'm probably not speaking too much out of order to say that. But also on the wider things, I think we all need to push the council. So, for instance, we talk about planning applications and the loss of biodiversity. If you see this advertised, you think there might be risk, if you can spend some time having a look at that, putting comments in about the need for that, they're cumulative, they do add up and they do make a difference. It's not that, yeah, the council's got lots of officers who are trying to block all this stuff, you know, not all of them anyway, and actually genuinely interested in hearing from the public about how they value biodiversity, how, you know, how a new building development would affect them and how they would lose, you know, something where, you know, the birds live and things like that. People do want to know that. It is something we can all do.
Lovely. Okay. Just 2 more questions. I'm sorry, we're going to have to call it a day then, because we do realise it's brief answers if we could ask for. So I think this one will be quite brief actually. So this is from Ross. It says, would the council consider a council tax reduction for those people who plant and maintain trees, hedges or large shrubs in their front garden? And it doesn't mean too much of a reduction, but this sends out the right message. That's going to be
I put a comment in the chat. Short answer is no. Council can't do that. That's the way the council tax legislation goes. But the council could do other things, and in the past it did have a scheme for distributing fruit trees and helping out that way.
So as Doug says, there are incentivizations that we can do, and certainly one approach that I've had was from someone asking whether they could have their council tax cancelled while they renovated their house to a high energy efficiency standard. So there are things that we can do. There are incentives. Whether we do it directly by reducing the council tax, that's not necessarily within our gift, but there are other things to do. And currently, we do have still schemes available, and schemes are being rolled out in terms of trees being planted with citizens across the city, where those trees are planted, what type of trees they are, all still needs to be fully fleshed out, but we're quite relaxed on that at this moment, and we're happy to work with everyone to try and get more trees into our highways as best as possible.
Lovely. So we're just going to make this one the last question, and then I'm going to hand over to Richard to wrap up for the evening. So the last question of the evening is from Nikki, and this is: we learned today that the environmental bill is being delayed by 6 months. So can Sheffield City Council commit any way to implementing biodiversity net gain policies as soon as possible before it's statutory to do so?
Yes, it just makes it harder, I guess. I mean,
yes,
you know, there's nothing stopping the council doing these policies. There is something in, you know, the suite of planning policies that allows for that. The only thing I say about biodiversity net gain is don't think that's the answer to everything. It's not the simple answer to let developers just pay things off by net gain. There's a lot more to be said for preserving what's there in the first place.
Any comments?
Absolutely. Yeah. As Doug said there is stuff that the council can do. It's better when it's supported by law, because otherwise it just gets challenged. We can make covenants and all sorts. It's whether they can be delivered, unfortunately. That's why I'm saying about devolving greater powers on planning down to councils and localities would be really, really helpful. Whilst Westminster still holds the stranglehold, we'll still be subject to the whims of others.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Right, we'll wrap things up because time's getting on. First of all, we're going to take a quick photo. So I'll say as before, if you don't want to be on this photo, then please blank the video. So we're just going to take a quick photo.
Annie, say cheese and wave.
Cheese.
Are you ready? You ready? 1, 2, 3.
Give us a wave. Give us a wave, please, for the cameras. This is it's going to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to unmute you all. Please don't shout rude words. This is just your opportunity. Basically, I just want to see a massive cheer and a round of applause for yourselves for coming, especially for the speakers. So we're going to unmute you all now. So now, oh, yeah, hang on. You should be able to unmute yourselves. Can you unmute yourselves? Can you unmute yourselves? Yeah. So if you no, hang on. 2 seconds.
Hang on.
Allow. No, you could.
Hang on.
2 seconds.
Hang on.
That box there.
Sorry, so many boxes to tick.
All right, try and unmute yourselves, but try and unmute yourselves. But there we go. Let's hear it.
Thanks, Rich and Dawn, for organising.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Anna.
coming.
Thank
Right.
you.
So, wrap up. What we're going to do, we're going to put the petitions in the chat box now. If you could sign the petition and share it with anybody that you know, anybody that you've ever met, people that you don't know,
Strangers,
just share that
anybody.
petition. And the other thing is, if you want anything, if you want to get more information from the speakers, this is aimed at the speakers. Speakers, if there's any links you want to share with anybody who's interested, then email sheffieldgreenpeace@gmail.com. That email's already in the chat box, but Dawn will put it in again now. And if you want to send an email to sheffieldgreenpeace@gmail.com. This is to all participants. If you want to ask the people any more questions, if you want to get involved with Sheffield Greenpeace, which I'll tell you about in a moment, then just send an email to sheffieldgreenpeace@gmail.com. We can also send you a recording of this event. Again, just pop your email in the chat box in the next 5 minutes.
Or email us directly if you don't want to do that.
Or just
email address.
just email sheffieldgreenpeace@gmail.com. We'll send all the links to you so that you've got more information if you want to get in touch with any of the participants who've been on tonight. Okay, does that make sense? Give us a wave if it makes sense.
Makes sense to us.
Lovely. So I'll just finally just say a little bit about Sheffield Greenpeace, because this is the plug.
This is ourselves.
This is our cell for those people that hung out at the end. So we meet every second Monday of the month. And basically, we're a group of people who are doing what we can to make the world a greener place, to make the world a safer place. So if you want to make a difference and you want to have fun at the same time, then please join us. If you want to join us, drop us an email at sheffieldgreenpeace@gmail.com and we'll be in touch. So very finally, I just want to thank all the people that have made this possible. A massive thank you to the speakers. Let's say we've already given them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. All 6 of you, absolutely fantastic. Thank you for raising awareness for these things. I want to say a big thank you to the Sheffield Greenpeace Action Group that have made this possible and all the work that they've done to put into it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On a personal note, I'd like to thank Dawn, who's worked her arse off. I know that's swearing, I got a rude word in at the end there. She's worked her absolute arse off to make this a success. So absolutely fantastic to Dawn. I'm so proud of her.
And thanks, Richard, for doing the emceeing.
And finally, thank you to everybody who's attended. It's fantastic to see 980 people come and listen and engage on such an important matter.
Yeah.
So that is it.
We're done for that. Awareness.
Like I say, just email us if you want more information on anything. Let's spread the word. Okay.